Hi, I'm Martha Engber, host of Vigilant Positivity, a blog and podcast meant to decrease polarization by uniting Americans through civil discussion that leads to common ground. Thanks to those of you who've tuned in. Please feel free to subscribe and grow the Common Ground movement. Every month, I try to do a citizen spotlight to cast a light on other Americans on both sides of the political spectrum who are working hard to decrease polarization. Today, I'm talking with Wes Chaput. Hello, Wes.
Hello.
Thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Wes Chaput is the author of The 7-Minute Citizen: Your Power, Your Rights, Your Democracy, a playbook for protecting the principles of a liberal democracy. Wes is a faculty member at Tabor Academy in Marion, Massachusetts, where he lives with his wife and children. He holds an MA in International Relations from Harvard University Extension School and a BA in History from Bates College. A passionate advocate for liberal democracy, he firmly believes that people can and should govern themselves. Through his teaching and writing, he aims to inspire and empower young people to recognize their potential and use it to build a better world. He has a presentation and is happy to speak with educators and youth groups. So let's start with our first question. I think certain words have gotten so politicized in our current culture that they immediately act as triggers. One of those words is liberal. Can you tell us the difference between a liberal and a liberal democracy?
Absolutely. And you're totally correct. And I spent a lot of time thinking about, do I use the word liberal democracy or do I use the word constitutional democracy? And ultimately went with liberal democracy because that's what the United States is, and that's what I believe is the most effective form of government. So, liberal is another one of those words. It's very hard to pin down, but in the American context, it's often associated with someone on the left or the center left. A progressive, perhaps, would be another word of it. But it's got a wide-ranging historical background as too, or historical. The context is really important. Um, so, in my mind, a liberal democracy has nothing to do at all with the political spectrum. The definition simply means any regime that is constitutionally limited, that is based on predicated upon universal suffrage, free and fair elections, rule of law, and respects individual rights. So in the book, I refer to it simply as a liberal democracy is any regime that is majority rule and individual rights. And a liberal can mean a human being who subscribes to a whole number of different political views across the political spectrum. So they're same word, but they mean very, very different things.
Who is the book geared toward, and why did you feel the need to write it?
So the book is geared towards two primary audiences. The first are young people, freshmen, sophomore in high school, but certainly juniors and seniors, so high school students, but also middle school students, students who are just on the cusp of beginning to build their political identity and consciousness. So that's the audience. But the second audience is, all right, well, how do you get a seventh grader to read a book about civics? And so the answer is you put it in the hands of their teachers, and more importantly, you put it in the hands of their parents. So those are the two audiences. The book is written, the style and the vocabulary is for young people, and it's trying to engage them as much as possible and get them excited. But it's also for the tool itself, and the 7-Minute Citizen Project is for teachers and parents.
Well, I'm very sorry to say that I didn't really have civics in class growing up.
Neither did I.
Right. And I actually completely appreciated the book. And I think
Great.
actually adults would as well, because it's
Yeah.
very simply worded and effective in getting the various points across. And it's only 79 pages long. So if you're listening to this, it's a great book, especially one if you're in a political discussion group. It's
Yeah.
a great one to use. Now, because of that, kind of skewing toward the younger
Yep.
kids in general, is that why you included the rap-like poems to help young people better remember and relate to the material?
Yes, and I'm very grateful that you brought that up because I took a risk with that. in the sense that I thought about I'm a history teacher. I'm a school administrator now, but before I taught history for 10 years and did a lot of poetry and did a lot of political poetry and ran a poetry club, and a lot of our students would do the same thing. And I thought about keeping the two projects separate, but I ended up bringing them together for precisely the reason that you just mentioned, which was if prose are your thing, then each chapter, each argument, each idea is, communicated in prose. But if that's not your thing and you're really looking for something short and engaging, then the poetry's there as well. So they're designed to kind of appeal to as many different styles and levels of reader as possible, while also mutually reinforcing each other. And hopefully they're memorable and fun and catchy. And I certainly enjoy writing it. So there's that too.
I I assume you have not had a school music group that's willing to take up the challenge of actually putting it to music yet.
Not yet, but I'm open to it. Maybe we can call up Lin-Manuel Miranda and get him on it or something.
Yeah. I love the way you opened the book. And it is, quote, as a 21st century citizen, you possess more power than 95% of the people who have ever lived, end quote. Considering the political unrest in our country and how threatened we feel regarding our rights, that previous statement may seem unbelievable to Americans.
Yeah.
Can you explain why we're still better off today than the vast majority of humans, even a few hundred years ago?
Yeah. Absolutely. So I think I do put an asterisk on the 95% because it is defensible. And I do believe that that's, if not exact, it's close enough, to that statement. And really what I'm trying to get at is there's a lot of hopelessness, out there, a lot of cynicism. People that you've interviewed before on the show talk about it. There's a ton of data to support it. And anyone who's interested in that is welcome to contact me. I'll happily provide it for them. Um, and I don't, it's not to say that and it's understandable. Of course it is. But it's also important, I think, to recognize that freedom and citizenship and liberal democracy, these are not historical norms. These are exceptions. And so, despite all the challenges that liberal democracy is facing, both in the United States and around the world, definitely part of a global trend. It's important to me to get young people to realize and hopefully get excited about how much power they really do have. And it really is extraordinary. So,
Well,
um,
you mentioned that the people of even a couple hundred years ago, the idea of a liberal democracy is a new invention, and
yeah.
that people before then lacked the rights of the citizenship in a liberal democracy. And what are some of the things that people lacked back when?
Well, um, depending on where you were, you literally had, the time and place and who you were as a human being. It's quite possible that you had zero to, I don't know, like a very, very few political options. You may have had zero recognized or formal political rights. So, and a good example of this would be, a peasant or a serf in medieval Europe, someone whose really only recourse politically, if you didn't happen to be born in the aristocracy or something like that, would be violence or moving or escaping and so there's a range. But certainly we didn't have equality of the sexes. Certainly a lot of the ideas that I mentioned in the book, bad ideas that are still with us, sexism, racism, all of those ideas were not even questioned, and in fact were established law in some cases, and certainly established cultural norms. And so, yeah, depending on who you were, there were the answer might be quite literally no rights
Yeah,
and no
no right to
recourse.
vote, no right to
That's
take
right.
up to complain about the government and lobby for changes and so forth.
Certainly were not literate, could not read or write, could not really advocate for yourself outside of your, and it's, but again, also don't want to overstate it. Like there certainly was large degrees, depending on where you are, of local autonomy. So it's not to say that you were completely, controlled, but it is to say that you had limited options.
Well, you mentioned oppressive social hierarchies, and
Right.
you touched on a few of those that still exist and seem stronger than ever.
Yeah.
Can you give us a few examples and explain why they continue to flourish and how they diminish democracy?
So certainly, I'll give you one that's pretty pervasive, and it's one of the in the book. It's the book's divided, as you know, into three parts: the rights, and kind of the ideas that sustain liberal democracy, and are the source of citizens' power. Some philosophical ideas to help young people build a philosophy of citizenship, and then the last is arguments of democracy. One of those is called the mudsill theory. So this is essentially the idea that some people are better than others. And if there was one idea, that was one idea that I would point to and say, is kind of the source of all the others, it's that one. Lincoln has a great line. I forget when he wrote it. It was early in his, maybe it was during the Stephen Douglas debates where he goes, basically, this is the same old serpent. It's justified every tyrannical regime in history. I'm better than you, therefore I have the power, I rule, and I'm in charge. And so that's the same idea that undermines patriarchy, a lot of the social conflict, racism, all these ideas. And the mudsill theory is a more recent iteration of that. And it comes from, God, blanking on the specific date, but the 1850s, where a senator from South Carolina gets up and gives a speech, which basically says, here's how the world works. White men are in charge, and the rest of you form a mudsill upon which society rests, and that's natural and that's good, and that's how it always has been, and that's how it always should be. So there's a pretty powerful idea. Some people are better than others. We've all encountered it in our lives, kind of regardless of who we are. Some of us more than others, certainly. Um, it's an old idea. It's a bad idea. It's still with us.
No, it's really true. You actually will hear that among current leaders that essentially the people who are wealthy deserve to be wealthy, and they are superior, rather than acknowledging all the advantages that they had that other people
Mhm.
did not. So I
Yep.
think that is a very interesting thing. Uh, so at this current time of political chaos,
Yep.
polarization and fast technological change, you mentioned that a lot of us feel scared and alone.
Yeah.
Then you give us a list of what we've got going for us in a democracy and why those elements give us power. So here we
Yeah.
are feeling very sad by ourselves and so forth. And yet you're saying time to turn your attitude around because this is what you've got. List those elements for me.
Absolutely. So, probably starting with you have the right to vote. That's a big one. Obviously, that's a huge one. So you can hire your government, you can fire your government, you can participate in your government. Um, so that's a very tangible, explicit one. Um, you have what's another one that's really, really important is I would say here, I got them right here, but
Yeah, feel free. The voting is such a big one, and I think a lot of people are disenfranchised. They believe their vote doesn't count, or they feel like our system has been the election process has been sullied to the point where it is our voting rights have been
right.
watered down and so forth. So that's a very powerful one, but feel free to
It
continue.
absolutely. And I think that they're right. There's a lot to that argument that there's certainly a lot of evidence that suggests that's true, but I think it's still also true that um, the right to vote is still strong enough that if enough people get together and point in the same direction, it's still pretty clear. So in the book, I say you're a citizen of liberal democracy. So simply still having citizenship status is clearly still very important, and something that is not being taken for is being called into question in various ways, in very tangible ways. Um, Another one that's I think underutilized or underappreciated, this is the one I was trying to get at before, is the corporations need your vote They need your data. Social media platform needs your data. And I think a lot of us engage with either technological companies or just go about living our lives, not really aware of the power of the purse, the power that we have with our economic decision making. And it's very clear because you can manipulate your algorithm very quickly, depending on, which ideas and which stories you post and which stories you follow. And economics are a very, especially in a capitalist society like the United States, are a very, very powerful tool. And so I think encouraging young people to think about, where do you spend your money? Where do you spend your time? What ideas do you think about? Um, that's all still very true. I will say, I do mention another one, politicians need your vote. The United States does have a particularly interesting characteristic where we allow politicians to pick their voters versus the other way around. So I do get some pushback on that one sometimes, like, my vote doesn't count necessarily.
Are
But
you
it's
talking
still,
about gerrymandering?
I am, yeah, gerrymandering and allowing, yeah, basically states to draw, group, crack and pack the districts according to their preference. And that's certainly a critique, but at the end of the day, at this point, politicians still do need your vote. So your vote does still count. Um, and I do
Um,
will say the last one I'll add is sorry, so rambling. The connection, your ideas, one of the upsides of social media and communication technology and the revolution, the digital revolution, is the cost of getting your ideas out into the world has never been lower. And I think that's also underappreciated. Um,
Very good. Okay. Anybody can say anything they like. It's a matter of
correct.
whether it's positive or negative, I suppose. So, if we have this power, and I'll agree with you, feels like power,
Yeah,
why do so many of us feel powerless?
that's a great question. I think again, it has to do with a lot of it has to do with social media and the way that it it kind of shapes our own worldview. So mindset number 3 in the book is called Know Your Algorithm, and it's got two parts to it. The first is the idea of making sure that your values and your beliefs are yours and that you're aware that often we inherit these and they could be coming from somebody else. And that's fine. It's not necessarily a bad thing to share the same values as your family, very common. But there comes a point where, as a citizen, you should reconsider them, reevaluate them. All right, do you believe that because your parents believe that, or do you believe that because you believe that now? So that's one part of it. But the other part of it is understand where you get your information from and understand how that information is shaping you. Um, so one of the reasons we're so alone is because we do spend so much time, in many cases for young people, it's like north of 5 or 6 hours a day, sometimes more, consuming media on our devices. And that by definition, even if you're consuming it next to one another, which is a very common sight at my school, kids sitting and scrolling together. So it's not to say that it's totally isolating, but but yeah, it is I think a big source of our aloneness. So in some ways it's a weird irony where we've never been more connected, but never more alone.
Well, it's interesting because in your book, you do provide exercises to
Yep.
get people talking to one another and to do by yourself. So, have you done these exercises with students? And if so, what do they feel about actually discussing these topics? Because discussion is what we're missing in social media. We think we're
Yep.
talking online and we're having this discussion, but we're not
Right.
really talking to people we know or
Right.
admire or who have much influence on us.
Right. Or who care about us, frankly, at all. Spot on. I do the exercises. I was ready to do one with you today too. I try to do them. I try to leave all these interactions with like, I want people to take something with it. We don't have to do it, but I'll tell you
I'm
about.
happy to try it.
All right. Well, there's one called it's called the dichotomy of control. It's number one. It's the number one philosophy in section 2. But essentially, when I do this one, I do with my students, they really enjoy it because it totally throws their whole world. It kind of not totally throws it upside down, but it really shifts the paradigm. So the idea behind this one is that all of life falls into two categories: things you control and things you don't. This is a Stoic idea. It comes from a guy named Epictetus. And everybody kind of is on board to that point. So I ask them to get out a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle of the page, and write out their sources of stress on one side and whether or not they think they control it on the other. So inevitably, in a school, you can guess the sources of stress. Young people are stressed about grades, they're stressed about their future, they're stressed about getting a good job or maybe getting to a good school after high school. Um, and they all think they control those outcomes. And
Mhm.
of course, they don't. And that's the part of the fun of the exercise. So I asked them to put a Y next to the different source of stress, if it's in their control or not. And inevitably they say yes. They say, I control my grades. And I say, really? Because I'm pretty sure I control your grades as your teacher. I give you the feedback. And they say, yeah, 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 yeah. But I control how hard I work and I control my effort. And that's the payoff because I say, yeah, but you weren't worried about your effort. You were worried about your grades. And so
Mm.
these exercises, when I do them, that one, it's all about becoming process focused. So think about the process. Don't worry about the outcome. When I do these exercises, they're all designed to kind of get people to shift their paradigm and focus on what they really can control. That's another reason people feel powerless. They go, I'm one person, I have one vote. What can I possibly do in this torrent of opposition? And the answer is, you don't control the outcome of the election. You don't control who wins or loses, but you do control what you think about it, and you do control if you participate.
And how you react.
That's right. So that's
Exactly.
really fun. So the answer to your question is yes, we do them, and it's a blast.
Wow, that's great. So the idea is a government official takes an action, and I immediately think, I don't really like that action.
Yep.
And the very first thing I can control is how am I going to react? Am I going to
Yeah.
get online and just do a lot of negative messaging? Oh, this is terrible, this is awful, and so
Right.
forth. Or I could not.
You could not.
Instead, right, because I can't control the action, but what I can do is say, oh, I'm going to write my Congress people,
Right.
discourage
Very
them from this. So
100%.
in other words, the quicker you can make that shift. So if we get a piece of news, as we seem to every day now, if we can make that shift, I didn't do that, but
Yeah.
I'm going to choose how I react to it.
Yeah.
Hmm, very interesting.
Epictetus goes a step further. He says the only thing you control is what you think about things. And
Yeah.
I think I bring that up a lot because I talk about this idea of building freedom, the positive definition of freedom. This book kind of assumes that. And in my presentations, I go into greater detail. And so the idea that what you think about things and what you do is really, really, really important. And I would suggest in some cases it isn't enough in and of itself. Because if you're thinking in a way that connects you with other people and is empathetic and is caring, and you believe that liberal democracy is a good idea, if enough people believe that, then ultimately it's going to be okay. It's going to survive. The idea is going to perpetuate.
Which is the idea of the common ground movement, getting
That's
enough
right.
80% of Americans together to realize that we are all more or less on the same page, and we need to work together to talk
Yeah,
to our government to change things.
I completely agree. It's one of the reasons I'm so excited to be talking with you, because
Yeah.
you're spot on.
Huh. Well, what particular concerns are you hearing from young people about our country and political system?
So
Or are they
they've,
just, they don't care. They're not really paying attention.
I would say that probably, I would say that I would used to agree with that. I think they are paying attention more in the sense that they're consuming a lot of TikTok and a lot of social media that's highly polarized and highly political. So the engagement is there. I'm questioning a little bit how healthy it is, which of course has been a transformation for me because when I got started on this journey 15 years ago, um, we were definitely combating more apathy than anything else. Just people being like, "This, why does this matter to me? It doesn't. I want to get a job." So I would say they are engaging, but I think, and it falls on both sides across the political spectrum. But I think what they're looking for is a, a place to have discussion and conversation without the fear of being canceled by one side or the other or attacked. So that's kind of missing. I think that, and that's why this one of the reasons I wrote this book is we need as many nonpartisan resources as possible because in my experience, as we've become more politicized and polarized in education and in society in general, we've stopped talking. And we've stopped having these conversations because they divide us. And nobody wants to be divided. Like, who wants to? You work all day and come home and get in a fight with your kid about politics. I can't think of anything I'd rather not do than that. But as a result, we're one of the strategies is just not talk about it at all. And that has consequences too, because we're all kind of left scratching our heads. Like, what do we do? And we do have a responsibility to rule ourselves. So I'm trying to carve out a space where young people and their parents can connect with each other and their teachers, but also like have these debates without fear that it's gonna go beyond that. And
Well, just out of curiosity, I have not checked this, but you're making me think about it.
yeah,
Is there are several organizations now that hold online discussions similar to Braver Angels, and they are meant to
yep.
be nonpartisan. They're meant to be safe places where you can talk about different subjects. Another one is Living Room Conversations. Have there been any nationwide or even local online or conversations specifically geared toward younger people?
That's a great question. I don't know of any in my area that are specific at the national level that are specific to young people. I'm sure they're out there. Um, I think Braver Angels is definitely one of them. I love them. They're fantastic. I think there's a huge need, and I'm hoping to create one with the 7 Minute Citizen Project. Um, and I also am hoping to the living room conversations is a great. I'm going to write that down because I'd love to reach out to them because that's really where I envision this work being done most effectively. You know,
Right. Very
I'm doing a podcast simply because most parents drive a lot. And I'm like, I need a way for people to be able to do this on the road when they're, circumnavigating the globe to soccer practice. Uh, that would be a great opportunity to connect with your kids. So the answer is I'm not aware of any, but I do sense some momentum at this moment where I think because of people like you and other groups like Braver Angels, we're kind of people care a lot, and I think there is a need there, and people are trying to meet it. So it's exciting.
great.
But
The definition of a citizen is, quote, this is what I pulled offline, a person who belongs to a particular country, state, or commonwealth by birth or naturalization and has legally recognized rights and duties as a member of that entity, unquote. But
Mhm.
you give us a different definition. Can you tell us what that is, by which I mean the crux of what it means to be a citizen and why you link citizenship to personal growth?
Yeah. So I think for me, and in the book, I don't actually define it this way, but I do in these exact words. But for me, citizenship, specifically the link between South growth. So in the book, I do say 95% of being a good citizen is being a good person. So like there's the link. And that's one of the ways that I think we draw a false dichotomy. We peel off, we separate our political selves from the rest of our lives. And I understand why we do that, but they're not separate. It's not possible to kind of put on your citizen political hat effectively and then like one day a year and go cast a ballot and then go back to being yourself. Like those two things cannot, that's not how it works. So my definition is thinking, speaking, and acting, i.e., living in such a way as to promote the cause of human freedom. And the reason I have broadened the definition a little bit is because the definition that you presented, while accurate, is also highly rigid and can be quite narrow, i.e., like you can change the law to determine who's a citizen and who's not. And there are certainly examples of countries who I would not constitute as free that do this. Um, And so you have huge, some of the Gulf countries have massive, have citizens who live amazing lives, and then, but the vast majority of the population is not in that category. So living living in such a way as to promote the cause of human freedom is a good way to think about it because it captures both the political nature of that project, but also the human nature of the project.
So it's almost like thinking of yourself as a cog in the machine or as actually as a person,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Or
So
one
the
very
idea really is that freedom is not inherent in the world.
Mm.
It does not exist unless human beings create it. That's the positive definition of freedom. And the way that you create it is through what I would say citizenship is a huge part of
What is democratic deconsolidation?
that.
And what are some of the skills citizens need to avoid that outcome?
I'm sorry. The reason I laugh is because it's such a mouthful. It's like, here's an idea that's really important. You can't even say it. Yeah, democratic deconsolidation. This is put simply, this is the process by which it's a social science kind of uh, you know, bar, but it's the process by which democracies that have been established kind of fall apart, or a better word would be degrade or corrode. And oftentimes it's very gradual. Um, and the skills that we need to prevent it are are the ones that I mentioned in the book, like being engaged, being able to think freely, having those habits of mind that ensure that to the largest degree possible that your thoughts are your own, like knowing your own algorithm. Um, Another good one is time and money. So this is number 9 in the book. And the idea behind it is basically if you want to know what people really care about, don't listen to what they say. Look where they spend their time and their money. And everyone, that's simple. That's pretty easy. That helps you in business. If you want to be an entrepreneur, that helps you anywhere. It's like I can talk all day long, but if you want to know what I care about, well, did you spend 3 years writing a book about citizenship? Yeah, I did. So there you go. Like that's a good one. Okay, so if a political leader is going on and on and on about how they're for democracy, but everything they do and every action and where they spend all their money is kind of indicates otherwise, that's a good example of a skill that you would need to be able to pick up on and then kind of make your choices accordingly. So it's hard to know too when a democracy crosses the threshold. It's like impossible to point it out. Yep, we were a democracy, now we're not. That's not how it works either. So democratic deconsolidation is usually a slow erosion of norms. So things that used to be off limits are now called into question. Ideas that used to be elicit firm responses and certain behaviors no longer do. And then, of course, legal and technical changes as well.
I think in the last 10, 15 years,
Yeah.
most Americans, it doesn't matter what their politics are, would agree that we are in that zone.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'll give you another term that's really fun and also hard to say. Competitive authoritarianism. This
Oh,
is this is a regime type. Two political scientists, Stephen Levitsky and Stefan Way, I think. I might have their names wrong. Um, but the idea is that between autocracy, straight up authoritarianism, and democracy is another regime type, and it's stable, and it's called competitive authoritarianism. And this is where you do all the things that democracies do. You vote, you have parties, you have the press and freedom, and it's a totally unfair fight. It's not even close. And so you go, there are prominent examples. Hungary is potentially a prominent example of this, where
and Turkey.
you have all the trappings of democracy, and yet one party just wins for decades. Um,
Yeah, I think I've heard that as well,
yeah,
as applied to Turkey as well. The
yeah,
idea is you have two political systems, but one is so weak that it will have no chance of ever winning.
right,
But by all appearances, people do have a choice when really they don't.
right. Can I add one thing here? Like for me, I nerd out on this stuff and I love it, but that's the type of stuff that turns young people off. If they're just getting started in their political lives, like talking about deconsolidation, talking about competitive authoritarianism. So that's one of the reasons why I don't mention any of that stuff really necessarily in the book, because I want people, that's great. That's like high level stuff. Uh, let's talk about, your daily life, the things that are going to make you a better person, and lay that foundation. And I think that's sometimes where civic education went wrong. Too much talking about how bills become law and not
Yes.
enough talking about, how to connect with people.
Yes. Oddly enough, though, if I had been in a class that actually talked to me like a human being when I was a
Yeah,
kid
yeah,
and used examples that I understood, I would be able to understand
yeah,
those ideas. If
for
somebody
sure.
came to me and said, "Okay, you've got this sports team, and there
Right,
are there's a two lead athletes who are the team, but
yeah,
only one gets all of the power and the other one
right,
never does.
right.
That fair?" And I would say, of course not.
Right.
There is
By
no
the way, the right one net's huge, one net's small, one at one side of the field is uphill, one's
right,
downhill. The refs, by the way, are
right,
completely colorblind and are only going to call fouls on you.
right. So,
Yeah,
using examples that kids
yeah,
understand, I think would go a long way toward
totally.
explaining these otherwise large
Yeah.
systems. Mm.
And it's important too, to your point, to not coddle them. They can't
Yes,
handle, they
I
are
would
ready.
agree.
Yeah, right? Like
I would agree.
you're going to be wielding real political power, hopefully for the benefit of others. That's the big part of it. Not just yourself, but also others. And we shouldn't shy away from that. You got to get you ready.
Yeah, I think that is one of the things that I felt as a kid too, is that you're being talked down to, like
Right.
you're not going to be able to understand it. When really, yeah, if you talk to me right, I'm going to understand
That's
it.
right.
But don't
Right.
pretend I'm stupid.
Yeah, that's a great point. Really good
Huh.
point.
Hmm. Well, I think you do an excellent job of creating a nonpartisan book that not only speaks to all Americans, but makes the point that we should stick up for one another.
Yeah.
That seems like common sense. But if it were true, why are we so divided?
Yeah. I don't want to keep pointing to social media, but I do think that's definitely part of it. But I do think it's bigger than that. I think one of the things that divides us is we've lost sight of how important we all are for one another. So what I mean by that is we humans can survive on their own, but they only thrive when they have meaningful relationships with other people, and we have forgotten that. We're not forgotten that, but we've come to, and it's a big part of being an American is the individualism. But I think sometimes our individualism it gets hyper, like we have hyper individualism, and what that means is it becomes very easy for us to other one another when you forget how much you rely on each other. So in the book, if I can hit you with some of the poetry, there's a line where I say, you forget that the person that you claim to hate or that you negate could just have easily been born you. And so that's one of the other things about know your own algorithm is you got to sit down and look and understand that a lot of this is chance and it could very easily be another way. And the person who you are demonizing or who is being demonized and you're maybe just letting it happen, not sticking up for them, could easily be you.
Mm.
And I think we don't say that enough. We don't. It's not to say that individuals don't matter. Of course they do. Like that's who we are. We believe individual liberties are fundamental to who we are. But that doesn't mean that there's not a community and that we need each other.
Yeah, I think it's easy to do things according to our own benefit, but we need to realize that what makes us happy
Right.
is making connections with people, which leads to my next
Got it.
question. When addressing Americans' unhappiness, you teach the skill of understanding what we control and what we can't. And why is that important for understanding polarized times. You touched on it earlier, but having a sense of agency about what you can do seems to be overshadowed currently by the very big problems in the world. So, you know,
So what can we do? So
sense
how
of
does that
control.
connect to our happiness? Well, the happiness is a fascinating subject, hard to measure, but I would say generally speaking, if you're unhappy, it's quite possibly because you're either not controlling something you can, or control or trying to control something you're not. And so one of the things that is fundamentally outside your control is other people. And so rather than trying to get other people to change, i.e., in a hyper-polarized environment, like spending a lot of time banging your head against the wall, trying to persuade, trying to understand, argue, yell, scream, trying to get someone else to come around to your point of view or whatever it is that you're doing. Like that's fundamentally, it's whether or not it happens has nothing to do with you. The only thing you can do is um, control your side of that. Now, it's not to say you shouldn't try to persuade, but it is to say that the outcome, try to divorce yourself from the outcome, try to engage in that process. So you can't make, I use this example in class because my wife used to teach math in the same school and they all knew her and she's awesome. So they were all like, they laughed at this, but I would say, I cannot make Mrs. Chaput love me. I would say that. And they'd be like, oh my God, like, what? I'm like, I can only determine how lovable I am. And I think that's that's a potentially a translatable lesson in the sense that you can't make this place less polarized, but you can be less polarizing.
Mm.
It's not to say that you sacrifice your beliefs. It's not to say that. It's to say that you proclaim. Timothy Snyder is one of my heroes, great historian, wrote a book called On Freedom, his most recent book. And in it, he says, you build freedom by proclaiming your values and then accommodating those of others. And it's the second half of that that we struggle with. Or
Yes.
so that's what I would say is, the second, like you can make room for other people in how you talk and how you act and how forgiving you are and how understanding you try to be. Again, I think where I get criticized a lot, and rightly so, perhaps, is that's not very inspiring. And it's hard. It's like you're basically asking me to accommodate someone whose worldview is so fundamentally different than mine. I view it as an existential threat. How can you ask me to do that? And I would disagree that it's potentially an existential threat, but it's not easy, but it's worth it. Like you have to make room for each other.
Honestly, I think a lot of the conflict is actually built in and encouraged by conflict entrepreneurs. And when you shove that aside,
Oh
the
yeah.
ability to come to common ground with another person of different political spectrum is immensely easy.
Isn't it
Yeah,
amazing?
it is. And I think that that's something that people who are unused to thinking like this, they don't believe it. It
No.
sounds too crazy. But you can, if somebody who is the opposite political spectrum and say, I bet we have a ton in common with our idea about immigration. And no, we don't. And then you're
Right.
like, well, do you think we should overhaul our system? Yes.
Right.
Do you think
Let's
it should be transparent and fair? Yes. And immediately you're like, there you go. So that a
uh,
lot of the complaints and conflict is actually out of the way, and you realize it's really generated by outside. It's not Americans. I don't know.
Martha, I think you're spot on with that. And just having that conversation and realizing that where the rage entrepreneur is such a great term. I've not heard that, but I love that. Um, I get a lot of like one of my three reasons why citizenship matters. I say one, it's common ground. It's literally the only thing we have in common. Like we could be totally different, but if we're both have a stake in self-government together. So at the very least, we have that in common. And hopefully we both believe that that's a good thing. And then the second is that it's an intergenerational project, which is very cool in the sense that there aren't too many of these out there where you are free, literally to a large degree, because of the thoughts and actions of people who you've never met. They lived and died 100 years ago or 60 years ago. And
Mhm.
likewise, there are millions of unborn citizens who are the freedom that they will live or not live is directly tied to what you think, say, and do right now. And that's a cool thing.
It's cool and scary, depending
Pressure's
on
on.
on what is being put into your head. Well, as
Yeah.
a last question, I wanted to ask you about something you wrote. Quote, as
Yeah.
history makes abundantly clear, just because you are born a free citizen does not mean you will stay one. Unquote. That seems pretty sinister. Yet your book is very positive, and full of encouragement,
Yeah.
such as a loving and caring citizen is a loving and caring person,
Yeah.
and that our duty as citizens is to support one another by building relationships and treating each other with respect. Yet, what we're seeing in the news and on social media, largely by conflict entrepreneurs, is often the opposite.
Yeah.
What gives you hope that we citizens, and especially our young citizens, will reunite and build a stronger democracy?
Um, okay. What a great question. So I would say two things. The second thing I would just say is that one of the great strengths of democracy, and I think it's number 7 in the book under the in the final section, is called self-correcting mechanisms. And this is a term that comes from historian Noah Yuval Harari. And the idea is that liberal democracies are very dynamic and very flexible. So one of the things, once it's established its roots, it's really hard to get rid of it because for a whole host of reasons, it's it's a really it's the most legitimate form of government, but people, the more pressure you put on it, the more you try to corrode it, the more alive it becomes. And so oftentimes what you see is when there's overreach, there's pushback and backlash. And it's very easy for people in power to underestimate just how much the regular folks, so to speak, do care actually about their
French
rights.
Revolution.
It's like, you guys, so you do see that quite a bit, where you'll see, a leader go too far and be held accountable to it. So that potential is always there. And when you're an authoritarian, you never really know, do you? What's going to be the tipping point? And that's why, whatever, we're going down a rabbit hole, why they always are generating fear, and it's never, ever, ever, ever enough. It can't possibly be enough because you never actually know how secure you are. So anyway, that's one thing. But the reason that I wrote that kind of pessimistic line at the end of a very optimistic book is because it's really important, I believe, that people understand that democracy is just an idea, that freedom is not a normal thing in the world. And the reason it's not a normal thing is because the idea that all people are equal, the idea that no one is any better than anyone else, that people can and should rule themselves is a rare, precious idea. And if people stop thinking it, if they start to think, well, maybe it's not that important that everyone is treated equally. Maybe it's not that important that men and maybe it's okay if we treat men a little bit better than women. If those ideas start to proliferate, and the idea that then the rest kind of falls apart. So I have on my Substack and online, I have this thing called the freedom cycle. And the first step is the thoughts, actions of the citizenry. And if people think, that is why I put that line there, that it's really, really important that we understand that this is an idea. And if people stop thinking it, then it goes away or weakens more likely. So, and that's a constant tension, by the way. And look at the history of the United States of America. There's always people thinking that that's not like a new thing. It's kind of always been one of the inherent contradictions in the US history is this tension between, well, we proclaimed everyone equal, but do we actually believe that?
Yeah, right. It's in our
So,
Constitution, right? And you're like,
exactly.
well,
So, so I mean, as long as we think about it and grapple with it, we're
Uh,
good.
well, I want to thank you for joining me. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I completely look forward to the possibility that there will be a national conversation for younger people because I would love to participate and hear
Fantastic.
what comes out.
Well, the pleasure is
And
all mine.
thanks again to those of you who listened to this episode. You can find a post and transcript of today's interview on my blog, vigilantpositivity.wordpress.com. Please join our cause.